Being a one-person shop is certainly a fine endeavor, and many people are very successful at it. As a matter of fact, that could be the definition of small business at its purest form. But often a business finds, over time, when it wants to grow, that it needs to have some type of staff, simply to meet customer needs or the demands of the business. In order to do so, you have to make sure that you address it correctly. In Peachtree, whether you have existing staff and you're just starting to use Peachtree, or if you're hiring staff for the first time, you need to make sure that you account for them and set them up correctly. In this chapter, we'll do just that. We'll talk about some of the concepts between having contractors versus employees. We'll walk through the process of enabling and setting up employees, as well as working through payroll. This way, you can make sure that you as a company are doing everything that you need to do to meet the needs of both your staff, the IRS, and your company as a whole. If you have experience in human resources or accounting, you might be aware of some of the many things that need to be considered when working with employees. But if you haven't worked as an employer before, you might need a little insight into what should be considered. So let's take just a few minutes to go over some of those considerations and concepts. And of course, if you already have experience, hopefully this will just be a little bit of a review. One of the first things that you really have to be aware of, because the IRS is aware of it, is the difference between an employee and a contractor. From an employment standpoint, often companies prefer to have contractors because, frankly, it's easier. They pay them just like a vendor, and then they're off and running. They don't have to do any withholding and any of the paperwork. But that's not what the IRS likes, and it may not be correct. So the main difference is that if you're an employee, you probably work at a facility, or they work at your facility, or with your tools. They probably also perform some type of supervised or managed tasks. They're not just on their own. They're basically told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. Now, I know that that doesn't mean you're micromanaging people, but in general, when you have an employee, there are certain processes they're expected to do. They're expected to do them in a certain way and on a certain time period. It probably is also that person's only job, or they don't perform similar work for other people. Now, especially in the economy these days, a lot of people are moonlighting or they have second jobs, but usually it's not in the same type of business. So they may be an accountant and they may be moonlighting working at a coffee shop as a barista. Lastly, they are paid as employees, and that's the most important thing. They get a paycheck, they get it on a regular basis, whether it be hourly or salaried. Now, contractors, on the other hand, they may work on or off site. That really isn't a good indicator. They're also able to perform tasks as they see fit as long as it meets the goal. And this, again, is kind of an interesting situation. I've certainly worked as a contract instructor, and that doesn't mean that I get to do everything the way that I want, but generally I'm hired to run a course, and maybe they dictate what type of courseware, but basically I get to run the class the way that I need to. Often they also use their own tools or equipment. So if you're working in construction, for example, the company would not be providing the tools, the contractor would be bringing their own. They often have little or no supervision. When I'm a contractor doing instructional design, I do my own thing for my own office, and I just check in on occasion at certain milestones, and I provide a finished product. There really isn't somebody looking over my shoulder, again, telling me what to do and how to do it. Also, as a contractor, the person can perform similar work for others. So, as a contract trainer, I can train for multiple companies. As an instructional designer, I can create instructional design for different companies. That's very different than providing either of those roles for a certain company as an employee, where usually they're the only company that I'm performing those services for. Otherwise, you get into those little non-compete issues. Lastly, and most importantly as far as Peachtree is concerned, contractors are paid as 1099s. That means that you're not withholding things on their behalf. You just give them a statement at the end of the year saying, this is how much I've paid you. You're responsible for all of your own taxes. Peachtree also has another designation, which is a sales rep. Peachtree actually uses both employees and sales reps can be either employees or contractors, so they can actually have this kind of overlapping thing. An employee, of course, could also be an employee and a sales rep, so we get that interesting combination. Both are going to be set up in the Maintain Employees and Sales Reps window. By adding a contractor this way, you can include them on invoices and on commission sales, and that's really the important part when it comes to Peachtree. And don't forget that if you're going to be paying people commissions, that inventory items have to be marked for commission in order for it to be calculated based on those sales. So what are the responsibilities of an employer, whether you are working for the company who's the employer or you're a sole proprietor or a small company and you are the designated employer? First of all, you have to meet payroll obligations. You have to pay payroll on time and consistently. That's really one of the laws. If a company is in financial trouble, they can write off all of their vendors, they can be late on their payments in their lease, but what they're not allowed to do is they're not allowed to miss payroll. They also are required to provide workers' compensation. You again can get into a lot of trouble if you have employees and you're not providing this type of coverage for your employees. You're also going to collect federal and local taxes on behalf of all of your employees. And then, of course, you usually have to pay matching employment taxes on behalf of the company. So there's two sides to that. With every payroll that you process, you will be taking out taxes on behalf of your employee and also making matching contributions on behalf of the company. That's the part where companies usually say, that's why contractors are easier. You don't have to do that for a contractor. But it is something you do have to do when you have employees. So what does it take to get ready for payroll? Well, payroll can really be one of the most important things that you do in your company. So you have to have some good information. You should confirm all of your company information, like your employee identification number, your filing requirements. Are you monthly? Are you quarterly? What do you have to do and when? You should also have all of your tax agency information. What is the formal name? What is the address that you need to mail things or submit things to? And what is, again, your filing requirement, monthly or quarterly? You have to also gather information about your employees. Names and contact information is something you should already have. You also have to know if they're hourly or salaried and what those rates are. And then you need to have a W-4 form on file, which designates what their withholding is going to be. And lastly, if you're going to be working with any direct deposit, you need to have banking information, both for your company and for your employees, so you can make electronic transfers instead of writing out paychecks. All accounting and payroll is based on something called a tax table, and these change quarterly, sometimes yearly. They change very often. It basically is when the IRS or a state or local tax agency decides how taxes are going to be calculated. You need to have tax tables in order for the software to do this. So when we want to create a paycheck and somebody gets paid, say, $100, we need to know how much taxes and for which agencies those need to be deducted. This includes for federal, things like federal tax, Social Security, Medicare, and it can be more than that. No tax tables are included with the software, and that's something that's important to remember, so you have some options. First of all, you can subscribe to Peachtree's Payroll Tax Table Update service, and that really is a very, very strong recommendation on my part. That will automatically keep your software up to date. Anytime there's a change, you don't have to try to keep track of it or to create those things in Peachtree yourself. Alternately, you can create your own tax tables, but what we'll see is creating tax tables is a very detailed process. It has to be done right, and there's an awful lot to consider. So again, I can't try to get this through to you more than I already have, which is I strongly recommend that you subscribe to the payroll service. It's not because I'm trying to make money for Peachtree or anybody else. It's just that that's the smartest way for you to do it. Then you can focus on other business activities.